I guess we'll get started. My name is John McNabb. I want to thank everyone for coming. This is my third DEFCON and the best one yet. As you can tell from the slide, I'm speaking about cyberterrorism and the security of the national drinking water infrastructure. A little about me. By the way, I'm not going to read all the words on every slide. You can read them faster than I can say them, and I'm going to use them as a jumping off point to, mention other things on the same topic as the slide. But I've been an IT pro for 5 years. It's my second or third career after being in environmental advocacy for Clean Water Action and being a lobbyist for the Massachusetts Environmental Agency. In both capacities, I did a lot of work in water supply protection. And my main qualification for talking on this topic is 13 years until a few months ago as a water commissioner in a small town in Massachusetts. I've spoken at one conference so far, and I'm speaking at Freaknik in Nashville later in the year. So I'm trying to the purpose of the talk is trying to make a realistic assessment of the potential of a terrorist attack, cyber or kinetic, against the U.S. public water system. Okay, some of you might be wondering, what the hell is a water commissioner? If you're from New England, you might have a glimmer of an idea because most New England towns have a fragmented sort of local government where the executive body is the selectmen, the legislature is the town meeting, and then there are various other elected or appointed bodies that do various things. And every town is a little different. In my town's case, and I'm going to try not to mention the name of the town so no one there gets mad at me that I pointed a finger at them, but it's an elected position in my town and in many others in New England, usually 3 people for a three-year term each, and it rotates, so one person's up every year. So you can see the picture there of me running for election the first time in 1997. And the pattern usually is for these low-level posts, so to speak, as opposed to selectmen or school committee, which are the really high-interest posts in small towns in New England, is that you get elected and you're basically not going to be opposed again. And that happened in my case. I had a relatively easy race against one opponent in 97 and then have been unopposed ever since. In most other places, and usually in the rest of the country where you have a mayor and a city council or a town council, the water department would be under the DPW. But the point is here that I was one of 3 people for 13 years who were the policy-making body, the managerial staff, and the top of the heap for decision-making. Not day-to-day. I wasn't the IT department. We didn't have an IT department. But I try to apply my IT knowledge whenever possible when looking at our SCADA system and these questions. The biggest issues that water departments commissioners look at is what's the budget. And it's not that easy to get rate increases. And that makes it hard to upgrade equipment a lot of times and to deal with the decaying infrastructure and the new regulations that come into place. So brief outline, I'm going to go through some definitions. I'm going to talk about threats to drinking water from terrorists or other parties. I'm going to describe the national drinking water infrastructure and some issues relating to that are pertinent to this topic. Then we'll go through the components of a single water system, the notional water system, and I'll discuss the instrumentation in each case, the pros and the cons of an attack vector on that water system. And then I'll tie it all together in talking about SCADA, which there's been a lot of talk at DEFCON this year about, which is good. And then I'll try to wrap it all together with an assessment of what's really the extent of the risk, what's been done so far, and what needs to be done. So definitions: public water system. The EPA defines it as a system that has at least 15 service connections or regularly serves at least 25 individuals. And I'll explain later that's a lot of systems in the U.S. SCADA, it's process control instrumentation and software used in manufacturing, infrastructure, utilities, etc. I realize there are some control systems that aren't technically SCADA, but I'm going to use SCADA as a generic term to talk about process control. We call it SCADA, even our little water system, and it really only runs in the plant and some remote systems, but it's the same idea. Critical infrastructure, and that's what this talk is really here for. Why is this talk at DEFCON? Is that it's a concern for security of critical infrastructure. And critical infrastructure is a quick definition, is infrastructure that's essential for the operation of society and the economy. There's other more technical definitions. There's a number of different definitions in the Bioterrorism Act of 2002. There are presidential commissions on critical infrastructure going back to 1998, and a lot of other legislation and regulation that deal with that topic. And there'll be more on that later. And cyberterrorism. Now, there's no accepted definition of terrorism that I've been able to find, and there's no, you get even more complicated if you try to talk about cyberterrorism. And I've heard other speakers say they use the word cyber only because it's convenient, and I agree with that, because it's got a lot of misconceptions. So without going through the dozen or so definitions that I found in my research, I'm going to define it as an attack through the cyberspace or the internet or computer that has an effect in the real world, that has a real, that breaks something, whether it's a person or a water supply or shuts something down or starts something up. It's not hacktivism, it's not defacing a web page, what some people call cyberterrorism. We're talking about the stuff that affects the real world from an internet connection in most cases. So how important is drinking water? In your home, you need to be able to drink water on a daily basis. You need it to make food. You need it for your toilet to flush and have sewage. And you need it for fire suppression for the hydrant outside the house. But bigger than that, it supports almost every other critical infrastructure that there is. And this is a list I took out of a government report on, looking at the interdependencies of infrastructures and which ones are dependent on drinking water. Agriculture, food, public health, I won't read the whole list. That looks like everything to me, but if there's anything missing, it's probably not that important. And on the right-hand side, I try to look for the flow charts that look at the cascading failures from one thing failing. And I couldn't find any that started with drinking water, but they all seem to start with power, of course. So here are two with power, and one talks about water. On the top one there, the bottom row talks about, power fails, water fails, agriculture fails. That's not necessarily drinking water, but irrigation water. And it causes a further failure in another sector. And in the bottom one, it's power supply disruption, water supply, medical facilities, medical treatment. So you can think about it in almost any category. The water supply fails, something else fails, society becomes less effective, there are less services available in other sectors of society. So the bottom line is water supply. We're not talking about water supply for its own sake necessarily, but it's a basic requirement for operation of everything. Drinking water has been the target of attacks for thousands of years. And my favorite one is Vlad the Impaler, Dracula. But the real Vlad the Impaler did poison his own wells when he was attacked by the Turks. He did a lot of other nasty things too. But there's a long history in warfare, but also in terrorism and of water supplies being poisoned. Some more recent, but some go back centuries. So that the point is that water supplies are a natural target in war and terrorism. We shouldn't be surprised when someone's threatening to attack a water supply or actually attacking it. There have been terrorist threats to poison the U.S. public water supplies, and through history, there's been some domestic folks, Order of the Rising Sun in Chicago, typhoid, the Covenant Arm and Sword of the Lord in Arkansas. They were threatening to poison water in New York, Chicago, and somewhere else. In both cases, they were caught before they could do anything, and the evaluation was they didn't really know what they were doing, and they didn't have enough of the substance to really make a difference. But it was taken seriously, and there were arrests and prosecutions there. There were a number of ones about Al-Qaeda and modern terror groups threatening us. This is a declassified document from a raid at the Tarnak farms in Afghanistan, where, if you can read it, it's handwritten of one of the Al-Qaeda operatives there, where they were had a training session, talking about, what sort of poisons to use for poisoning water supplies. So there's realistic evidence supporting the fact that Al-Qaeda, they've threatened to poison the U.S. water supply, and there's a piece of paper, showing some planning. We're talking about cyber, of course, too. In the talk, I'm going to bounce between cyber and kinetic or real-life attacks because either one, they could happen at the same time, actually. So looking through the literature and research and what other people have done in this topic, it boils down to they've got people with IT skills. Since after 9/11, the U.S. broke up a lot of their centers, and they've been using the internet to coordinate communications. The evidence seems to suggest that they use the internet for the same thing almost everyone else does, for communication, organizing, propaganda, information, disinformation, for managing the organization. There's evidence that they use it to conduct cybercrime to raise money, but not for cyberterrorism as I defined it. I corresponded with Dorothy Denning, a well-known authority on this subject, who's testified before Congress, and she testified in 2002-ish that while they do have cyber capabilities for doing these type of things, that they don't seem to be actually using it for terrorism to create to attacks in the kinetic world. And she emailed me a few months ago saying she still has that same conclusion. And I can't find any evidence that they've done that. But again, we don't know everything they're doing. This is the Cybernet Cafe in Britain, where a number of Al-Qaeda fellow travelers were arrested in Britain a while ago that they used for communications. There have been some cyber attacks on water systems. Now, this is a short list because there isn't a long list. None of these could be called a cyber terrorism, but it's interesting if you go through the details. The Salt River Project was attacked via modem. Let me find my notes, excuse me. The Marucci water system is the most popular one, where a consultant who was not hired for a job got very upset, and he used his laptop to communicate wirelessly with the pump centers at the wastewater treatment facilities, and he caused at least 46 releases of untreated sewage into the environment. So we have a modem, we have wireless. This was Harrisburg. You get a lot of news coverage. An employee came into the plant with a laptop that had got infected with spyware that then infected the computers at the water plant. So it wasn't anyone actually attacking the water plant, but again, it was an intrusion. The Tehama-Kaluza Canal Authority was an employee who installed some improper software and was alleged to have caused damage. So that's an employee insider job. Now, RISI, the Repository of Industrial Security Incidents, which is the authority, I guess, worldwide for keeping track of these things, says that cyber incidents in water systems, and they mean water and wastewater and agriculture, it's a broad term, have increased 30%. But we'll look at the numbers later. Those still aren't big numbers. Okay, now the good news is if some bad guy wants to attack the U.S. water infrastructure, it's almost impossible to attack the whole thing because there's 155,000 public water systems. They're varied. My water plant is unique. Every water plant is unique. They're not cookie cutters for the most part. They're individually designed and built depending upon the exact characteristics of the water that they use, that they treat, their demand, the history of the plant, where it started. A lot of plants were built 30, 40 years ago and are sort of organically growing from that. So even if they were all connected, you'd have a devil of a time trying to have the same, cyber attack affect each one. So again, I won't read all of this, but again, the contrast is with the electrical infrastructure down here is that there are 3 grids. In a recent study by a Chinese grad student alleges that one or two attack on 1 or 2 nodes in any of the grids can cause a cascading failure in the electrical grid and shut the whole thing down. That's what the report said anyway. You can't do that in the water systems. You shut one plant down and the rest of them aren't affected at all. So that's sort of the good news, that they're isolated, except that there are some water conglomerates. The biggest one is American Water, which is the largest private U.S. water provider, which runs or owns facilities or both in 35 states. Not everything in each of those states, but one or more in each of those states. So there's 15 million people. That's a big chunk of the U.S. population in 1,600 communities. So I didn't look into their networking, but if they're networking through all their or most of their systems, that's a potential cyber intrusion that you could get a bigger bang for the buck than going after individual systems? That's a question that I'll just leave out there. But it's still, a question you